Travels and Traditions with Burt Wolfe is a classic travel journal, a record of Burt's search for information about our world and how we fit into it. Burt travels to the source of each story, trying to find the connections between our history and what is happening today. What he discovers can improve our lives and our understanding of the world around us. And of course, there's always Burt's slightly irreverent sense of humor.
Uh-oh.
Oh.
Oh, my goodness. We're going to need a bigger can.
The main things to remember are, first, look up the number in your new directory. Second, raise your telephone and listen for the dial tone. Third, dial each number carefully, making sure you bring the dial all the way around to the finger stop each time. Then let go.
In this program, we'll take a quick look at the history of communication, from the caveman to the alphorn, to the telephone, and finally the cell phone. I'll point out how the cell phone has changed both my family and my work life and how important it is to me as I travel around the world. But we'll also track a series of reports that suggest my cell phone may not be as safe as I thought. Cars, planes, trains, different cities and different countries influence how cell phones interact with my body. We'll find out about a few guys who filed lawsuits because they were not warned about the possible dangers of traveling around with their cell phones. And most surprising, a major manufacturer of cell phones introduced a series of applications that limited the use of their own products. And we'll find out what we can do about some of the problems that are emerging. Originally, if you had something you wanted to say directly to someone else, you spoke directly to that person. A while later, we developed a number of long-distance systems. You could send a message by drum. You could use an alphorn. You could use semaphore flags. And if you were skillful at training animals, you could use a pigeon. As technology advanced, we began using the telegraph.
Hello. Hello. Hello.
And the telephone.
How are you? Oh, it's you. I didn't expect you right here. Quiet! Get out of here.
You could also send a message by mail, and eventually by FedEx, UPS, and DHL. And now we have smartphones, tablets, and computers and laptops. As I travel around the world putting together my programs, I am constantly struck by the amount of time that people spend on their smartphones, including me. And then there are all the other wireless devices. A while back when I was in London working on a program about the history of tea, I saw a newspaper headline that read, "Cell Phone Health." The article pointed out that the leading mobile phone makers were warning their shareholders that their companies might be involved in costly lawsuits. Their concern was that the use of their cell phones might cause cancer. The companies included BlackBerry, Nokia, and Vodafone. Nokia's notice stated, and I quote, "There have been some recent research results that indicate the possibility that electromagnetic waves emitted from mobile devices and base stations have adverse health effects, such as increasing the risk of cancer." A key point here is that the companies notified their shareholders and investors, but not the people who were using the mobile phones that these companies make, or the general public. Think of it this way. There's a company that makes cookies, and they discover that there might be a poison in their cookie that would make people sick or even kill them. So they immediately notify their shareholders of the problem and tell them that if people start getting sick and dying, there might be a lot of lawsuits and that might affect their earnings. But they don't tell the people who are selling their cookies or the people who are eating their cookies.
Oh, one more thing.
The cell phone companies involved in these stories say that it is their responsibility to warn their shareholders no matter how unlikely. Well, let me say this about that. It's not so unlikely. A court in Italy ruled that there was a link between tumors and mobile devices. The judges added that any firm that requires the use of mobile phones as a condition of work may face major liability. It also appears that doctors are finding more brain tumors near the parts of the brain where most people hold their cell phones. Forbes magazine reported that in France, a giant mobile phone company named Orange recalled about 90,000 of their phones because of radiation levels. Deborah Davis is the president of the Environmental Health Trust, and she said financial threats from litigation are growing in step with scientific evidence linking phones to health damages. Another story was in The Guardian, also a British newspaper. It was titled The Inconvenient Truth About Cancer and Mobile Phones, and it summarized some of the research that links them together. One of the most interesting parts of The Guardian story was that the journalists could not find a single insurance company that would offer a policy covering the negative health effects of cell phone radiation. That's got to tell you something.
It's time to move on.
And most surprising was the Apple Developers Conference. They've actually introduced a series of programs designed to limit the use of their cell phones and other Apple products. I found dozens of stories telling me about the dangers of cell phone radiation, and almost an equal number telling me there's nothing to worry about.
In the 1950s...
Problem is, I grew up when most experts were telling me that there was no conclusive evidence indicating any health problems related to smoking.
At your neighborhood service station, they call it Esso.
Or leaded gasoline.
You simply dip it in the applique and roll on this exciting...
Or lead-based paints. As part of the research for this program, I went to London to attend a conference that addressed a series of issues related to children, mobile devices, electromagnetic radiation, and cancer. Erica Mallory Blythe is a medical doctor and an expert on the biological and health effects of radiation.
So cell phones are probably one of the devices that have been most heavily investigated because they were one of the most popular initial devices on the market. They have been linked with brain tumours, and the link is cited in quite early literature, but it's consolidated over time. So we had studies in the 50s, 60s and 70s, particularly from military institutions, that showed a risk of DNA damage. But once people started popularly using mobile phones, then they started doing human epidemiological studies to actually look at whether these brain tumours were increasing in the higher users of cell phones.
I've seen a number of studies that indicate that specific forms of cancer are increasing in response to radio frequency radiation.
So the advice I give at this point in time is that you need to distance yourself as much as possible from the device, so you can use it on speakerphone and move it away from your body as much as you can. So people shouldn't keep their phones in their pockets, or certainly not in their bras.
I also talked to Annie Sasko. Annie is a medical doctor and a cancer epidemiologist who specializes in issues relating to public health.
So we are dealing with exposure to magnetic fields, which are much, 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 much higher than the background levels. And the other thing about the electrical fields is that in the EMF used right now, but this may change with the newest generations, 5G and the like. They are pulsating fields. It's not continuous exposure, because the body is quite good at getting used to all kinds of stuff if it's continuous. But if it's on, off, on, off, on, off, on, off, on, off, and at frequencies which are unbelievable, thousands of times a second, tens of thousands of times a second. Now there will be millions of times a second, on, off, on, off, on, off. Our poor cells don't really appreciate, and the living systems in general do not appreciate.
In New York, I talked to Martin Paul. Dr. Paul is a leading expert on the health effects that result from the use of cell phones, the internet, and video gaming.
We've put out devices with the industry claiming safety based on a theory that there are only thermal effects that's been known to be wrong for at least 40 years, and without one single biological safety test. That's true whether you look at cordless phones, you look at each of the different types of cell phones, you're looking at Wi-Fi, and there are a lot of different Wi-Fi systems, and you look at smart meters, you're looking at cell phone towers, and now 4G and 5G. It's crazy. It's insane. In the US, we take great pride in our science. We have far more Nobel laureates than any other country in the world. And we say, hey, we're the top dog in science. Starting in 1986, going to 1999, the US government cut off all research funding in this area. So we have no studies on these things coming from this country. So the consequences of this is that we've put out, I forget, something like 350,000 cell phone towers in the US without one single study of the effects of the cell phone towers. There are, in fact, 17 studies that I know of that have been published elsewhere in the world. And each of them is finding effects of people living within something like 300 meters of a cell phone tower.
I have a cell phone, and I use it often. It's a basic part of my everyday life, and it's almost essential for my work. Could I live without it? Sure, but it would make a lot of things difficult. My smartphone keeps me in touch with my family. It keeps me in touch with my film crew.
Where are you guys?
It shows me how to get around the locations where we are working. It gives me instant access to research. Everyone in my family has a smartphone, and they use it often. Everyone I know has a smartphone, and they use it often. And we're not planning on giving them up. Are there real health problems? And if there are, what are they? And what can we do about them? That is what I'm going to try and find out as we travel around. I was sitting in the waiting room of my doctor's office on my cell phone talking to my producer. When she came in, she looked at me, she looked at the cell phone, and pointed to the cover of a magazine. The headline read, "Mobile Phones. The Danger Has Been Proven." Inside were 10 pages about the negative effects of mobile phones on your health. A major area of concern was radio frequency radiation. But what exactly is radio frequency radiation? Let's start with radiation. Radiation is energy in the form of waves and particles. But it's important to make a distinction between the radiation produced by Mother Nature and the radiation produced by industry. Mother Nature's radiation has been around for millions of years, and we've done the best we can to adjust to it. The radiation produced by industry has been around for about 150 years. This is a very short period of time, and we know very little about the long-term health effects. Mother Nature's stuff includes radiation from the sun, the infrared warmth that you feel from a wood-burning fire, the radiation that is released from lightning, the radiation produced by the Earth's magnetic fields, and everyone radiates energy as the result of our normal body temperature. Though I suspect that Arnold's body radiates considerably more than mine. And then there's the much higher man-made radiation produced by machines like X-rays. Radio broadcast waves, television signals, radio transmitters, and of course, smartphones, cell phone towers, antennas, and Wi-Fi routers. And in addition, all the wireless devices that connect to routers, antenna towers, and the wearable devices like Bluetooth. And let's not forget electrical and magnetic fields from power lines. I saw a demonstration where fluorescent bulbs were placed under a power line, and the radiation was so strong that they lit up. As part of my work, I often end up at security checkpoints in airports. Some of them use scanners and send out radiation that passes through your clothing and bounces off your skin and the objects under your clothing. The radiation creates an image that the security agent can check. The federal government says that there are no known negative health effects from the scanners. Key word here is known. Apparently, for 50 years, no one could figure out that leaded gasoline caused brain damage. And even after they figured it out, it took them years to get around to stopping it. And when they got the lead out, they okayed the use of benzene in the gasoline, which was an established cause of cancer. Interesting. They took out something that caused brain damage and replaced it with something that caused cancer. So rather than wait until they know what they are talking about, and even though I'm rather ticklish, I asked for the pat-down. When I was a kid and went to a store to buy a new pair of shoes, I would put my feet into an X-ray machine to check out how my feet felt in the shoes. Well, you don't see those anymore because they turned out to be dangerous. A key thing to remember. The regulators talk about the negative effects of the heat that is emitted from our devices and that heat's relation to cancer. But an equally important, if not greater danger, is the non-thermal, non-heat radiation, the frequencies and signal characteristics. This is the stuff that can also lead to cancer. I have a friend who was a senior executive in the cell phone industry. So I gave him a call and asked him whether he thought there were any negative health effects from using a cell phone. He told me that while he was in the industry, he didn't see anything that terrified him. But he also pointed out that most people who were using cell phones began using them when they were quite older, and that the time they would be using them would be much more limited than the time that a kid would be using them who's now 7 or 8 years old. And then I saw a piece of research indicating that 1 out of every 10 2-year-olds is regularly using wireless devices. The research on the effect of the technology behind the cell phone began in the 1940s, and the technology only came into general use in the mid-'80s. Mobile phones didn't become very popular until the 1990s. Though one of the commercials for the early cell phones became one of the most popular commercials ever.
Hello.
Hi.
What are you doing tonight?
Me?
Join me for dinner?
Sure.
See you at 8. 1 black coffee, please.
Well, that's a quick look at the history of communication and how smartphones and other devices are changing our lives. We also learned that the radio frequency radiation from these devices might be dangerous to our health. Here are the top 10 safety tips in relation to cell phone use. Keep the phone away from your body. Even cell phone manufacturers tell you to keep the phone away from your body. Just keeping it 4 inches away will make a significant difference. There are dozens of devices that have been developed to protect you from the radiation produced by your cell phone. There are special headsets, pouches, meters that measure the electrosmog around you, and things that are designed to keep your cell phone away from your head. You can check them out online and see what might work for you. It's preferable to text instead of talk, which is difficult for me. So much of my life is about verbal communication. My preference is always to talk to someone rather than write. I also feel that the tone of voice is often as important as the words. But for short and precise messages, I'm learning to use text. When you're not using your phone, turn it to flight mode. That turns off the wireless transmitter, which reduces your exposure to radiation. Check the power of the signal on your phone. If the signal is weak, your phone needs to work harder, and that produces more radiation. Avoid using your phone in elevators and closed areas like a parked car, or a bus, or a train. And the moving vehicle is even worse. The cell phone antenna is constantly searching for a contact, and that increases radiation. It's best to use your phone while staying in the same location where there's a strong signal. Make sure you store your cell phone away from your body, not in your pockets. I keep mine in my briefcase. Next, melatonin is a chemical that your body produces. It helps you sleep. Electromagnetic fields interfere with melatonin production and disturb your sleep pattern. When I go to bed, I put my cell phone on flight mode and keep it charging in another room. Okay, that's a lot of information. And it might sound like I've gone off the deep end and turned paranoid about my cell phone. I know I won't be able to do all the things recommended all the time, but anything I can do is a step in the right direction. I clearly remember being told that there was no problem with smoking, or using lead gasoline, or leaded paint, or asbestos. That's a photograph of the first 2 workmen to use asbestos suits. It's hung next to my desk for over 40 years as a reminder to question everything I'm told. And I certainly invite you to question anything I say. What's fair is fair. For Travels and Traditions, I'm Burt Wolfe.
Play it again, Sam, for old time's sake.
You must remember this.
Good idea. If you'd like to see this program again, or any of the hundreds of programs we've made for our public broadcasting stations, or see the material that was great, but we couldn't fit it into the program, you can see it all on burtwolfe.com or YouTube Burt Wolfe. This could be the beginning of a beautiful friendship.